Welcome back to Racing Rundown. On today's video, we have the first of three previews that we're going to be having this week on Racing Rundown, and this is, of course, a preview of the Grade 1 Whitney at Saratoga. We've got 6 horses lined up for this race, at least at the moment. I'll get into that in just a moment on the potential logistics of this race, but I will mention, before we get any further into this race, we will have a couple other stuff, or a couple other videos on Racing Rundown, I should say, this week. And the first one, in addition to this video, we will have a preview of the Saratoga Derby, the second of 3 grade 1s on this card. And in addition to that, we will have the usual segment of Racing Rundown around the world. This week, we are talking about the Phoenix Stakes at the Curragh for 2-year-olds in Europe. So be sure to check that out as well. And we'll move on now to the first horse that we're going to discuss, and that is American Revolution. The winner of the Cigar Mile last year. And American Revolution this year has been rather, I think it's fair to say he's been rather disappointing. But, he's had 2 starts this year. The first one was a race that he was absolutely not set up for. The original plan had been to run him in a New York bred stakes race on the weekend before the weekend before the Blame Stakes. And when that race didn't fill, American Revolution needed a spot, had to run there. And that race was never going to be a good spot for him. So he certainly needed the spot to come back there. And then since coming back from that, or in his start following that race, he ran a whole lot better, ran a very good runner-up effort in the Stephen Foster behind Olympiad. And we'll talk about the big 2 in this race, Olympiad obviously being a part of that. But the way I'm going to play this race is I'm going to try to split the top 2, or the 2 best horses in this race on paper. And I'm not going to use American Revolution, but if I'm giving you advice on how to play this race, I would definitely say you want to try to split Life is Good and Olympiad. I think that's your best chance to make some kind of money, is to play 2 horses, one of those big 2 in the race on top of someone else in here. American Revolution is probably going to be the 4th choice if he stays in this race. I should mention there has been some talk that he might withdraw from this race, so that might be something you have to consider. But American Revolution has run a couple quality efforts in his career. Obviously, toss out the Blame effort, but the run at Churchill was very good last time. However, I'm not going to use him because I like one of his other stablemates in this race a little bit more than him, and I'll get to Happy Saver when it's time to get to him. But we'll now move on to the number 2 horse in this race, and that's Hot Rod Charlie, runner-up from the Belmont Stakes last year. And Hot Rod Charlie has had a very weird year up to this point, and I would definitely call it disappointing, especially after that last effort. Now, Hot Rod Charlie ended off 2021 with a very weird defeat on December 26th in the San Antonio, went over to Maidan, won one of the rounds of the Al Maktoum Challenge, and then was second in the Dubai World Cup. And, he didn't look really good off the turn in the Dubai World Cup, and then, he kind of picked off Life is Good, who was getting tired toward the end of that race, and got up for second. My general belief on the Dubai World Cup has been that the form from it is not really that good for horses that are going, these longer distances. And certainly that was borne out with Hot Rod Charlie in the Salvatore Mile. He was beaten by a clearly, on paper, clearly inferior horse that he should not be losing to in Mind Control in that effort. He was only beaten ahead. He was coming off the layoff there from Dubai, and that, as we saw with Country Grammar last weekend, that is generally something horses lose coming back from the Middle East. But at the same time, Hot Rod Charlie should have been able to beat Mind Control if Hot Rod Charlie is a top-level horse truly in this division. So I don't really like Hot Rod Charlie in this race. Hot Rod Charlie's always been a hanger, and, he's a very good bet to hit the board, but he rarely ever wins major races. Again, his one big graded stakes victory outside of the Louisiana Derby was the Pennsylvania Derby last year, and outside of that, it's a lot of seconds and thirds for him. And I think that there are just a few better horses than Hot Rod Charlie in here. I'm also a little bit interested to see what the tactics are going to be for him in this race. He has speed. He certainly can use it. He has the speed to keep up with Life is Good. I'm not going to go into the whole song and dance that I went in back in the winter when I did the Dubai World Cup preview here on Racing Rundown. But as I made clear there, this horse has speed to keep up with your Life is Goods and Olympiads in this race. So I think he certainly could potentially be a pace presence, but I'm ultimately going to stay away from him in this spot. Now we're going to move on to the number 3 horse in this race, and we're not going to spend too much time on him. That is Zoomer. He's a filler horse in this race, and again, not really a whole lot to say about him. Clearly outclassed by all these horses. He does have a couple stakes placing efforts, but it should be mentioned that his 3rd place in the Westchester was not a very good effort. He's coming into this race out of a claiming race back on the 17th of July, so clearly inferior in this spot. I won't have anything to do with him, as I'm sure most out there won't have anything to do with him. So we'll move on now to the number 4 horse in this race, and that is the big horse in this race that most people are going to try to take against Life is Good with, and that is, of course, Olympiad, the winner of the Stephen Foster last time out at Churchill Downs. A very impressive Stephen Foster win for Olympiad in that race. All the metrics came back huge for it. It was a very good visual victory. If you look at the early part of that race, Olympiad was forwardly placed. Everybody else who was near the front end, Caddo River, Mandaloun, they packed it in down the stretch there, and Olympiad won it, and he won it strongly going away toward the end of that race to maintain about a 2-length victory. Did get closed up just a tad by American Revolution, but was still a 2 1/4 length victory for him toward the end of that, and he definitely saw out the trip really well toward the end of the Stephen Foster, and it set him up really well for this race. Now, I'm not going to get into how the market's going to go for this race right now, but I do think Olympiad is going to be the second choice in this race, and I think he might have a tactics advantage in this race, and I'm going to save a little bit of that talk for when I get to Life is Good, but that is definitely where Olympiad is going to factor in here. He has shown the ability to be tactical. He can be forwardly placed. He can sit off of it a little bit. And I'll get into, in just a moment, some of the things that I think Olympiad can do in this race. But obviously, the folks that are backing him, it makes a lot of sense why people like Olympiad in this race, because that last effort in the Stephen Foster was such a good effort for him. We'll move on now to the number 5 horse in this race, and it's a horse that I'm really intrigued by, and that's Happy Saver. And I almost went to Happy Saver on top in this race, and I'll talk about that when I get to Life is Good. I know I've been hinting at Life is Good. He's obviously the real linchpin in this race. But Happy Saver has been as consistent as a horse can possibly be throughout his career. He's a Grade 1 winner already, and it's nice to see a horse like him that did win a Grade 1, still continuing to run at 5, and he has been picking up throughout his career plenty of really great graded stakes placings. He was 3rd in the Suburban last year, 2nd in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, 2nd in the Clark, 2nd in the Ali Shiva, and 2nd in the Met Mile last time. So he's been racking up a lot of checks in graded stakes races. And, last time he had a great race considering he wasn't going to beat Flightline. He has already been 2nd to Olympiad. That was in the Ali Shiva. And then he was 2nd behind Maxfield in the Clark. So I would argue 3 really good graded stakes placings, not Grade 1 placings, but graded stakes placings for him in the lead up to this race. And I think he is almost a lock for another graded stakes placing in this race. And I have to say, he's got to be the horse that you use in this spot to split up the 2 big horses in this race. And I'm certainly going to be doing that with him. That's my big play for this race. I'm going to play Happy Saver to split Life is Good and Olympiad and finish 2nd in this race. He is going to, I don't know what the market's going to be in this race, but he's going to be some kind of pretty decent price in this race, because I imagine Hot Rod Charlie will take a little bit more money than him. Quite possible American Revolution, if he does stay in this race, takes similar money to him, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a tad bit shorter, but they'll be around the same price. But you're looking at 4th to potentially 5th choice on Happy Saver, and that's going to be a really good value on a horse that hits the board like there's no tomorrow in his career. Tons of consistency for this horse. I considered picking him to win, ultimately couldn't do it, but there's a ton of upside for him and plenty of reasons to like him to hit the board. And like I said, I think he's pretty much a lock to hit the board in this race. But now we have to move on to the big horse in this spot, and that is, of course, Life is Good. And that'll get into my maybe overanalyzation of this race, or maybe we'll get it right like we did in the Dubai World Cup. Now, if you remember back to the preview that I did in the Dubai World Cup, I have been one of the biggest cynics on Life is Good the entire year, and that is going to continue in this race. Now, we go back to January, his Pegasus World Cup victory. Everything that I said in the Dubai World Cup preview, and I'll leave a link below in the description to that, because I don't want to repeat myself for the sake of not making this video 45 minutes. But I will say that if you go there, you'll get a good sense on what I said about Life is Good. And all that stuff has not changed. The difference is that we're not going a mile and a quarter in this race. We're only going a mile and an eighth. And the initial on the surface thought process is, okay, going a mile and an eighth, that's fine. And that was originally how I was thinking about this race too. But a couple of things have kind of led me to back off of Life is Good a little bit. Now, full disclosure, I was expecting as recently as today that I was going to pick Life is Good. And I had kind of written something down in my notes back in June that Life is Good was pretty much the horse that I was going to go with in this spot. But things have changed the last week or so. And the reason that I'm really looking at it from this perspective is how the races at Saratoga have gone, or how the races on the dirt at Saratoga have gone up to this point through the meet. And the thing is that the lead has not been the place to be up to this point at this Saratoga meet. The track has been very deep, and the horses that have been forwardly placed in some of these dirt stakes have been backing out of races toward the end of them. I picked early voting last week, I should say, in the Jim Dandy, and early voting had a really good, fractions were pretty good. Early part of the race looked really good for him, but he packed it in down the stretch. And I'm nervous that that's going to happen with Life is Good, because Life is Good has always been a horse that's packing it in down the stretch. If you go back to his Pegasus World Cup, he was clearly getting tired toward the end of the race, and people have argued with me about it. And I will contend that the Dubai World Cup proved that is actually what was happening with him in the Pegasus World Cup. Now, originally, I thought that Life is Good was going to go out, put some distance on the field, look like he did at Gulfstream down the stretch, but still get the job done by a length and a half in this race. And this is where we'll get into my picks portion of this race, because I don't think that Life is Good is going to win this race because of the way the track has been playing up to this point in this meet. So my win pick is going to be Olympiad in this race. Olympiad has been 4 for 4 this year, 5 for 5, I should say, this year. 4 straight graded stakes victories, as good as you can possibly be in the year 2022. That has been Olympiad. And this is the perfect spot for him to take the step forward, get his big grade 1 victory. Now, why am I taking against Life is Good? Because the way the track is played at this point through the meet. I originally thought Life is Good was going to have a 4-5 length lead entering the stretch of this race, and he was going to hold on and win by a length and a half. I still think that's possible, but I'm not going to play it that way given the way the track has been playing this meet. And that's really what has been the deciding factor. So I'm going to pick Olympiad on top in this race. And in order to be able to make any sort of money in this race, I feel you have to try to split the top 2 in this race, as I said I'm going to do. So I'm going to do that with Happy Saver, try to split Olympiad and Life is Good. So that'll be my top 2 for the race. Olympiad and Happy Saver. Life is Good, hold on for 3rd or finishes 4th. It doesn't really matter to me, because the 2 important things are Olympiad to win and Happy Saver to run 2nd in this race. So that's it for this preview of the Whitney. Be sure to check out the preview that we'll have of the Saratoga Derby also on Racing Rundown. There will be those links as I referenced throughout the video below in the description. We'll see you next time. Have a good one, and hopefully we're able to help you out with something in this race.